Simon, we saw a good reaction on the pitch to the draw last week. What sort of reaction have you seen this week?
Yeah, like obviously we were really happy with the outcome from the game last week. It was nice to get the point, which was so important to everyone. And yeah, as you can imagine, the boys have been in a good place and trained well.
Wes said the Derby record wasn't the biggest priority. Now it's out of the way. Even finishing with 2 wins can't change anything, particularly in terms of league position and everything. So, give us an insight into the mindset and motivations going into these final 2.
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, they're 2 great games to be involved in. You know, as a football player and as a football coach, we know that we want to. As I mentioned last week, we wanted to be clear that we were fighting to finish the season as strongly as possible. So, from that perspective, in terms of our process going into these games, there's no change really. And we know, we also know, as we've mentioned, the quality, of the Premier League. And I don't think you can go into any of these games with a mindset other than trying to be the best version of yourself. And really, that's definitely the case going into this game.
Against City, I think there were perhaps 3 players made a significant contribution for the first time under you. Have you had even more players sticking their hands up with their performances and giving you more headaches this week?
Yeah, I think we have got a decent sized squad, of course, and there's always an element of how people are training, how people are pushing, and how much that can influence your decision in your team selection on a Saturday. So for sure, the guys that came in last week gave a great account themselves and were part of from our perspective, a wonderful result and a really good, defensive display, and their contribution to that was, as you mentioned, massive. And yeah, there are other players pushing as well, but ultimately, I'll pick a team that I'm confident is the best team for the job on the day.
Have you got any injuries, illnesses? Carl Walker-Peters back? Anyone out?
Yeah, obviously Carl had the illness last week. He hasn't trained much this week, so there'll be a decision to be made on that. But no, other than that, we're generally got a fit squad to pick from.
For this game, so much attention on the occasion, but what are you expecting from Everton on the pitch, first of all? Yeah,
I think that since obviously David Moyes has gone in, they've done well to really sort of finish their season strongly. We know it's going to be an emotional game for the football club as a whole. The last men's game at Goodison, so we know they're going to want to give a really strong account of themselves on the day and win the game. That's for certain. So we're going to have to be at it, and I think Everton have got they've got players that can hurt you. And we have to be prepared for that. We have to be ready. A side that can be aggressive in their actions. So look, as is the case for us, we need to be as organised and motivated as possible. And our intention is to go there and perform as well as we can to get something out of the game.
Do you have to do anything different in terms of making sure your players aren't distracted by all the celebration party elements of the day?
No, I wouldn't have thought so. I think we're professional players. When the whistle blows, by the nature of it, you're focused on your own individual jobs and the team's job. So, I think whether it's partisan or not, or whether it's a hot atmosphere on the day, the lads at the end of the day, they want to win the game. We'll want to win the game and we'll want to play well. So I don't see that as being a distraction.
Have you ever been part of an occasion like this before, the final game in a stadium?
Not that I'm aware of. Probably not one worth mentioning if it was.
What about Goodison? Have you got any memories? Have you been up there many times?
Yeah. I mean, I took a Brighton FA Youth Cup game there, I think, and Big Dunk was the manager for Everton. So, I sat in my seat the whole game. No, I think it's a historic stadium. And I've been there to watch a few games. Whether it be scouting or whether it be, as I said, other development under 21 games that I've been involved with, 23s games. So, a great place, and what a privilege it is for us to be part of that game. And certainly for myself, I've spoke about the 7 games in general, how honoured I've been to lead the club, and obviously it's a great game to be involved with when we look back at it, I'm sure. But we're absolutely going there to put that to one side and win the game if we can.
You've been very good at answering some wider issue-y things in the recent weeks, and it just occurred to me a few days ago, I wonder about days off there was a bit of consternation back in December before you were in charge. A couple of results went badly, and some fans found out that the players had been given the day after the defeat off and the next day or whatever, and the attitude was surely they should be in training harder than before and things. And I think last week the players had maybe 3 days off, and it obviously didn't affect them negatively because they then put in that was performance against City. So can you discuss the balancing act you have to do where you have to train but you also have to rest and recover and things like that?
Yeah, I think that every football club and every manager and every structure will be taking different contextual issues into account when you're making decisions around team selection, days off, travel that's been involved, injuries, emotional state of the team. So all of these things matter. So I think, ultimately when you make decisions, you're making it around, how can your team be as fresh and energetic and as knowledgeable for the next game as possible. So look, I think every game, everyone's going to view that slightly differently. But I think for me, when coaching a group of players, you want them to be fresh and ready for the job. And I think, particularly when you get to the end of the season, one thing I'm fairly certain everyone would agree with, that you're not going to get your players any fitter. You're not. And small things come into it. The weather's changed. The football season now runs towards the end of May, where you can be playing in hotter conditions. And so there's lots of minimal changes which can make a difference to the decision. So, but I think whether you're going to be in 5 days on the trot into a game or whether you're in 2 or 3 days, ultimately everyone will be making that decisions because they think it's logical, and it's the right thing for the group as a whole. So, that's going to look different from week to week. And I think for us, looking at what the season's been, it's been a difficult one in lots of respects, and mentally that can be grueling. And so I think it's about a bit of intelligence really and making the best decision for the group. But one thing's for certain, that if we didn't think it was the right thing, I would never do it as a coach. So you've got to be confident with your decisions, and there's different contexts for different decisions.
And the days of being brought in the day after a defeat to just go running as a punishment, they're long gone, aren't they?
Yeah, maybe not everywhere. I'm not too sure. I mean, like I said, look, there is science involved now, and we're very lucky that we get given data that perhaps wasn't available a long time ago, which can give you can add to your intuition as what an individual may need or what he may not need, and who might be close to injury, who not. And so they're all useful things. But also you're guided by your intuition as a coach and a manager as well, I'm sure. And you have such good resource available to you in informing you for your decisions. But there's a bit of intuition as well, and sometimes you can't gauge, where maybe someone is emotionally at, other than gaining a bit of feedback or listening to where a team are at, because these things matter. Yeah, I don't think you can separate, sort of mental and physical. I think the two entwine into each other. So again, you're taking that into context. But in terms of recovering and preparing for the next game, it's about being as professional as possible at all times. And one thing I'm certain is in the 7 games, by the time we finish that I'll be adamant that we've done everything we can within our power to perform as well as we can within these games.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Seeing as we're on that sort of subject, of these batches and the points you've picked up and things like last weekend, has that made you, whether it's here or anywhere else, now want to stay in first team management rather than development?
Well, look, I was a professional player, and my coaching career has dipped in and out of first team coach, head coach in my own right, and so I don't really define my career as one thing or the other. I think I've got the skill set for both. I enjoy both have very different challenges, but ultimately, look, whether I'm working with a team of 19, 20-year-olds or a team of senior pros, I look at the things that are important in the modern game, and I think that's developing teams to win games of football and also supporting individuals to become the best version of themselves, both as a footballer and helping them reflect to be the best, not the best person, but, help people, really. So I see that as my role, no matter what position I'm in.
There is a pastoral element to it, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Which is really rewarding.
Yeah, but my experience, I can only tell you my experience of working in players in their early 30s who maybe are starting to edge towards the end of their career, and they still need support, and they still need direction, and they still need reflection about how they can, even at the later stages of your career, you can still improve. And I'm not going to drop names, but I'm talking about players that have played right at the top there. I've had that relationship with. So again, the next bit for me is not, it doesn't need to be defined into one thing or another. And I just feel that if you're in the game now, that your job is to look at what's in front of you, and if you're a head coach, to help the team improve and get results, but also help people improve individually.
Have you enjoyed the relentlessness of it though? Because you have got different areas when you're like on the touchline of the Premier League. It's different to being an under-21 coach, obviously, because there's media commitments, there's all sorts of stuff. Have you enjoyed taking all that on in this sort of level?
Yeah, I think me by nature, I'll be my own biggest critic. I think if you speak to most coaches and managers, that no one want to be harsher on them than they are themselves. So, as much as my environment might change around me, and one week I might be in front of 40,000 instead of 2 man and his dog, for me, mentally, it feels quite similar actually in some respects. And again, as we spoke about the players, when the whistle blows at Goodison, you focus on your job. And that's similar for me on the sideline as a coach, about, working with your staff and working with the players and the work you've done leading up. So, but it's more about, it's about when I maybe reflect back, that might feel different of how I reflect, but really it's like it's felt quite natural for me. I've been in professional football in one way or the other since the age of 14 years old, so it's not anything I've not been used to be honest.
Talking of Goodison then, so it's 10-3. The noise is ramping up, and everyone knows it's a big occasion for the men's team at Goodison after 133 years. What is the messaging to your players to make sure they're not swept aside on the pitch by David Moyes' team and by the crowd and by everything just being overwhelming?
Yeah, listen, it won't be overwhelming for us. I think how many of these players played in a playoff final at Wembley last year, which the magnitude of that game supersedes this one from our perspective as a football club. So that's no concern for me. We want to go and ruin the party, if you like. Of course, any team going into this game as an opponent, as an away side, will just want to go and give the best version of themselves. And we want to, being clear, we want to finish the season with, we're playing for as much pride as possible, and we've spoke about performing as well as we can, finishing the season to create momentum going into next year. Whatever the team selection is, whatever that looks like, every individual involved has got a responsibility, to live up to that as best we can. So, the bits around the edges and the noise and the last game at Goodison, that's for other people to sort of reflect upon and enjoy, or not enjoy. But for us, it's about being great professionals, really.
Saints have actually got a history of did it at Main Road to Manchester City in 2003. So, but when I look at the two challenges, talking of City last week and this, they couldn't be more different. The challenge of playing Pep, the challenge of playing David Moyes. So what are the key things your players have to be up to match David Moyes' side? Because to me, on the surface, it seems like there's a physicality about the opposition and the directness. There's a different challenge to City.
Yeah, they've also got quality within that directness and aggressiveness, if you like. And so, I think there's no doubt about it that you've got to be up for the battle. If you're not up for the battle in these games, then you'll have a problem, and the initiative of the match can swing away from you. But again, we're the away side. In the Premier League, we know that we have to get our basics right, that we have to be solid, and we have to be hard to beat again. And the ability for us to limit opponents to big chances has been impressive, I think, in the last 4 weeks in particular. And we're going to be aiming to bring that quality to our game again, and hopefully, add a little bit more in terms of our attacking presence as well.
How much has the clean sheet last week, allied with getting past the 11 points, how much has that, have you evidenced that, looking at the players, and perhaps their shoulders are a bit freer this week, perhaps they're not feeling that burden, has it helped hugely this week in training?
I think as far as the evidence goes, you know, we had evidence going into the Manchester City game that if there's certain things, taking the Leicester one out of it, that we've done really well and we felt we needed to get back to. So it was more, you know, validation as a group that, look, if we get these bits right, you know we can be a hard team to play against. And again, there's no right or wrong way to win a game. There's different ways, and one of the ways that we committed to was like, look, let's be solid and let's be really good without the ball, in a way which can help us be in games and possibly even win games. And again, the evidence was there up until large parts of these games that was. So for us to get the clean sheet and get to the 97th minute and against, you know, one of the best teams around to deliver a clean sheet, I don't think we can underestimate, you know, give anything away on that, really, because it's an incredible achievement. So we're going to need that again. Absolutely. But equally, you know, it was it's about rolling into the next task again, and, you know, taking what was good and looking at perhaps what we want to do better. And again, I've said from day one that, you know, working a process as a coach is important, that, you know, you don't get too carried away and you don't get too down when it doesn't go so well, because you've got to stay somewhere in the middle and be measured and try and be fairly objective and not over emotional about what's happening. And that's what we've done. You know, we bounced back. There was as much optimism in many respects going into the City game as we had going into the Villa game or the Fulham game, and, you know, we looked at what wasn't great in the Leicester game and we tried to fix it, and I think that happened.
Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Yes, Simon, just to jump back to Carl.